Dr. Rebecca Ashford had been a prisoner for 37 days before she realized the Vorun were afraid of silence. The spire rose from the frozen wasteland like a shard of obsidian glass, its walls embedded with sensor arrays that could detect a moth's wingbeat from half a mile away. The Vorun had built it specifically for her, a cage designed around human biology. They monitored every flutter of her eyelids, every contraction of her heart, every degree of warmth that radiated from her skin. Their kind navigated by thermal signatures and electrical impulses, perceiving reality as a symphony of heat and current. To them, humans burned like stars in the darkness, impossible to hide, impossible to lose. Rebecca stood at the curved window of her cell, watching 3 Vorun guards patrol the courtyard below. They moved with an insected grace, their segmented bodies covered in chitinous plates that refracted light in oily rainbows. Sensor stalks protruded from their heads, constantly twitching and rotating as they painted the world in thermal gradients and bioelectric fields. She could see the way they tracked small animals through the snow, their attention drawn to every spark of life within range. "Your compatriots will not come for you." The translator crackled as Commander Vosketh entered her cell, his bulk filling the doorway. His sensor stalks oriented toward her, reading the spike in her heart rate. "We detect every ship that approaches this world. Every soldier carries a signature we can identify from orbit." Rebecca turned from the window. She kept her voice steady, measuring each word. "Then why keep telling me that?" Vosketh's mandibles clicked in what the translation matrix interpreted as amusement. "Because I find your hope fascinating. Thermally speaking, hope manifests as increased circulation to the prefrontal cortex. I can watch it bloom in your skull like a small sun. How poetic! How factual!" The commander moved closer, his sensors drinking in her bioelectric field. "You designed the quantum encryption that protects Earth's military communications. Your knowledge would save us years of research. Join us willingly, and you will live comfortably, or we will simply take what we need from your neural tissue after you expire." Rebecca met his gaze, or what passed for a gaze in a species that perceived through radiated heat. "I've already told you. The encryption keys change every 48 hours based on quantum fluctuations I don't have access to anymore. Kill me and you get nothing. Perhaps." Vosketh tilted his head, sensors adjusting. "But we have time. Humans are resilient, but isolation erodes even the strongest minds. We will speak again." He left, the door sealing behind him with a hiss of hydraulics. Rebecca returned to the window, her reflection ghostly in the triple-paned glass. The spire held 12 guards at all times, rotating shifts every 6 hours. 4 patrolled the exterior, 4 monitored the sensor arrays in the control room, and 4 remained on standby. She'd mapped their patterns, not because she believed escape was possible, but because keeping her mind sharp was the only weapon she had left. The snow fell harder as evening approached, blanketing the wasteland in white. Rebecca ate the tasteless protein paste they provided, performed her routine exercises, and lay down on the narrow bunk. The walls hummed with sensor activity, a constant reminder that privacy was an illusion. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about Earth, about the research team that had depended on her, about the life she'd built before the Vorun ambush at the Geneva station. She was nearly asleep when the temperature dropped. At first, she thought the heating system had malfunctioned. Her breath misted in the air and goosebumps prickled across her skin. She sat up, reaching for the thin blanket, then froze. The sensor hum had changed. The constant background drone now carried an edge of agitation, arrays recalibrating frantically as if searching for something they'd lost. A Vorun guard burst into her cell, his sensors sweeping the space. He ignored Rebecca entirely. "What's happening?" she asked. The guard didn't respond. He backed out slowly, mandibles twitching, and sealed the door again. Through the window, Rebecca could see the exterior guards converging on the main entrance, their movements jerky with confusion. Their sensor stalks rotated in wild patterns, painting the courtyard again and again as if unable to trust their own readings. Then the first guard fell. There was no sound. No gunshot, no energy discharge. The Vorun simply collapsed mid-step, his body crumpling into the snow. His companion spun, sensors flaring, searching for a threat that registered as nothing more than empty space. He lasted 3 more seconds before he went down too, dropping like a puppet with cut strings. Rebecca pressed against the window, her heart hammering. The remaining exterior guards retreated toward the entrance, but they moved like soldiers fighting in the dark, firing their plasma rifles at empty air. Brilliant blue bolts scorched the snow, melting furrows in the permafrost, but they hit nothing. The guards fell one by one, their bodies forming a trail of unconscious forms leading to the door. Inside the spire, alarms began to wail. Rebecca could hear Vorun voices over the intercom, their translator units struggling to convey panic in human terms. Sector 3, nothing visible. Thermal reads ambient, no electrical signatures, repeat, no signatures. Something's moving, southwest corridor, but sensors show, the voice cut off. Rebecca's door unlocked with a soft click. She stared at it, her mind racing through possibilities, then grabbed the metal water pitcher from her desk, the closest thing to a weapon in the cell. She eased the door open and peered into the corridor. Bodies. 6 Varun guards lay motionless on the floor, arranged in a rough line as if they'd been advancing toward her cell when something stopped them. Their sensor stalks hung limp, but their chests still rose and fell with shallow breathing. Not dead, paralyzed. Dr. Ashford. The voice came from directly beside her, and Rebecca nearly screamed. She spun, pitcher raised, and found herself staring at a figure that her eyes struggled to accept. The woman stood 3 feet away, dressed in a form-fitting suit of mottled gray that seemed to absorb light. Her face was pale, almost blue-tinged, and her movements were slow and deliberate, like someone walking underwater. Most disturbing were her eyes, calm, focused, and utterly devoid of the warmth Rebecca associated with living humans. "I'm Sergeant Emily Tate of Task Force 66. The woman's breath came out as the faintest mist. "We're extracting you. Stay close, stay quiet, and don't touch us unless we tell you." "How did you?" Rebecca started, but Tate raised a finger to her lips. 5 more figures materialized from the corridor, stepping into view as if emerging from behind invisible curtains. All wore the same light-absorbing suits, all moved with the same eerie deliberation. A man with close-cropped hair and East Asian features, his name patch red, Huang, knelt beside one of the fallen Vorun and checked its pulse with glacial slowness. "All stable," Huang whispered. His voice sounded distant, as if spoken from the far end of a tunnel. "Dosage correct." Tate nodded and gestured for Rebecca to follow. The team moved through the spire in a formation that felt more like a dance than a military operation. They flowed around corners, their footsteps completely silent despite the metal flooring. Rebecca tried to match their pace, but her normal body temperature made her feel like a bonfire by comparison. She could see the others tracking her heat signature with subtle glances, adjusting their spacing to keep her centered in their formation. They reached the control room where the sensor arrays were managed. Through the observation window, Rebecca could see Commander Vosketh and 3 other Vorun frantically working the displays. Their sensor stalks whipped back and forth, painting the room in desperate sweeps. "They're inside the perimeter," Vosketh snarled, but sensors read nothing. "How can there be nothing?" One of the technicians adjusted his display, enhancing the thermal overlay. "Wait, there, that shimmer in Sector 5 like a cold spot, it's moving." "That's not possible. Nothing can reduce its signature to ambient levels while remaining mobile. It violates basic thermodynamics." "Commander, the guards aren't responding. I count 19 down across all sectors." Vosketh slammed a manipulator against the console. "Seal all exits. If we can't detect them, we trap them. Flood the corridors with sensor fog." Tate made a hand signal, and the team shifted formation instantly. A woman with dark skin and intricate cornrows, her patch red Foster, moved to the control room door. She pressed something against the lock mechanism, and Rebecca heard a soft hiss. Foster counted silently on her fingers. The door opened, and the team flowed inside like water through a crack. The Vorun had no time to react. Foster and Huang moved with synchronized precision, their movements identical as they approached the 2 technicians from opposite angles. Twin needles flashed in the fluorescent light, striking nerve clusters at the base of the Vorun's sensor stalks. The aliens collapsed without a sound. Vosketh spun toward the intrusion, but he was looking in the wrong direction. His sensors told him the room was empty except for the blazing heat signature of Dr. Ashford standing in the doorway. By the time his eyes, his actual limited visual organs, registered the gray-suited figure standing beside his command chair, it was too late. Tate's needle found its mark, and the commander crumpled forward onto his console. The whole engagement lasted 8 seconds. A man with weathered features and a Louisiana accent, Thompson, according to his patch, moved to the sensor array and began entering commands with slow, deliberate keystrokes. Killing the perimeter sensors, they'll think it's a system crash. Can they detect us now? Rebecca asked, her voice shaking slightly. No, Tate's response was matter-of-fact. The chemical agent we use drops our core temperature to match whatever environment we're in. Right now, we're registering at approximately 28 degrees. Our hearts beat once every 5 minutes. Electrical activity in our nervous system is minimal. To their sensors, we're indistinguishable from furniture. Rebecca stared at the woman. That should kill you. It would if we maintained it for more than 90 minutes. Tate checked a device on her wrist. We've been in hibernation state for 43 minutes. Plenty of time. Thompson finished with the console. Sensors down, extraction window is open. The team moved toward the exit, but Tate paused at the observation window. She looked down at the courtyard, where the first guards had fallen, then at the sprawl of unconscious Vorun throughout the facility. Rebecca followed her gaze and felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. You moved through this entire base, Rebecca said slowly, and they never knew you were here until you wanted them to. Correct. Tate turned from the window. Vorun doctrine depends on sensor superiority. They've never encountered an enemy that could simply disappear from their perception. It breaks their entire tactical framework. You're not just invisible to them, you're nothing. Now you understand, Tate gestured toward the corridor. We need to move. The extraction craft is waiting 3 clicks north. They descended through the spire, encountering 2 more guard patrols. Each time, the team's response was identical. Perfect, synchronized movements that ended with paralyzed Vorun and absolute silence. Rebecca tried to watch how they did it, to understand the mechanics of their technique, but her eyes kept sliding away from their forms. It was as if her brain refused to acknowledge people who registered no thermal presence, who moved without disturbing air currents, whose hearts beat so slowly they might as well be corpses. They exited through a maintenance airlock. The frozen wasteland stretched endlessly in all directions, the snow falling in thick curtains that reduced visibility to mere yards. A tall black man, Rodriguez, produced a locator beacon and activated it with a single press. The device emitted no sound Rebecca could hear, but within 30 seconds, a shape emerged from the snow. The extraction craft was smaller than Rebecca expected, barely large enough for 8 people. Its hull was the same light-absorbing gray as the team's suits, and it hovered 3 feet off the ground without any visible engine wash. The boarding ramp descended, and Tate ushered Rebecca inside. The interior was cramped and utilitarian. Rebecca strapped into a jump seat while the team secured themselves around her. She noticed that none of them were shivering despite their lowered body temperatures, and their breathing remained slow and measured. Only their eyes showed any indication of normal human vitality, tracking movements and monitoring displays with sharp intelligence. The craft lifted silently and accelerated into the storm. Rebecca watched through a small viewport as the sensor-silent spire shrank to a dark spike against the white landscape, then disappeared entirely. She turned to Tate, who sat across from her with the stillness of a statue. "How long have you been able to do this?" Rebecca asked. "The hibernation technique." Tate's response was delayed, as if her slowed metabolism affected her speech processing. 14 months. It started as a medical treatment for deep space travel. Someone in special operations realized it had tactical applications. Someone thought to weaponize hypothermia and bradycardia. Yes, Tate's pale lips curved slightly. The Vorun taught us that relying on a single sense is a vulnerability. We just found a way to exploit it. Rebecca looked around at the other team members. They sat in perfect stillness, their eyes half closed, conserving energy. "And you volunteered for this?" "We all did." This came from Huang, his voice a quiet rasp. "When you can make yourself invisible to an entire species just by slowing your heartbeat, you don't need permission to operate behind enemy lines. You just become part of the background and do what needs to be done." The craft banked sharply, and Rebecca gripped her harness. Through the viewport, she could see the curvature of the planet beginning to show as they climbed toward orbit. Somewhere up there, a larger ship was waiting, probably something stealthy enough to have inserted the team without triggering the Vorun's orbital sensors. "How many people know about Task Force 66? Rebecca asked. "Not many." Tate checked her wrist device again. "We're not supposed to exist in any official capacity. The conditioning is difficult and the psychological effects are significant. Most candidates wash out during training." "Psychological effects?" Tate was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried an undertone Rebecca couldn't quite identify. Sadness, maybe, or acceptance. When you spend that much time at near-death temperatures, moving through spaces where no one can perceive you, it changes how you see yourself. You start to feel like a ghost, even when you're warm and visible. Some operators have trouble coming back from it. Rebecca thought about the perfectly synchronized movements, the eerie unity of the team's actions. You move like one organism. We train in hibernation state. It creates patterns. Tate's eyes refocused on Rebecca. But it works. We've extracted 17 assets from Vorun facilities. You're the 18th. 0 casualties on our side, 0 enemy deaths, just paralyzed guards who wake up wondering what happened. The craft shuddered as it punched through the upper atmosphere. The snow gave way to stars, and Rebecca could see the dark shape of a frigate hanging in low orbit, its running lights dimmed to minimum visibility. The name stenciled on its hull read Nightingale. They docked without ceremony. As soon as the airlock pressurized, the team began their recovery protocol. Tate peeled back her sleeve, revealing a small injector port, and pressed a vial against it. Rebecca watched as color slowly returned to the woman's skin, starting at the injection site and spreading outward. The others did the same, administering doses that would gradually restore their metabolisms to normal function. The warming process takes about 2 hours, Tate explained, her voice already gaining strength. Too fast and we risk cellular damage. Too slow and cognitive function degrades. A medical team waited in the frigate's bay, ready to monitor the operators during their recovery. Rebecca wanted to thank them, to express gratitude for the impossible rescue, but the words felt inadequate. These 6 people had walked into a fortress designed to detect their every heartbeat and emerged victorious, because they'd learned to stop being detectable. Captain Lisa Brennan met them at the medical bay entrance. She was a compact woman with gray-streaked hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in space. Her gaze swept over Rebecca, assessing injuries before settling on Tate. "Mission success, Sergeant." Tate nodded, her movements already becoming more fluid as warmth returned to her muscles. "Asset recovered, no complications. Vorun forces neutralized with standard paralytic protocol." "Good work." Brennan turned to Rebecca. "Dr. Ashford, welcome aboard the Nightingale. We'll have you back on Earth within the week. The brass is eager to debrief you on Vorun encryption capabilities." Rebecca barely heard her. She was watching the team as they filed into the medical bay, their gray suits now seeming oddly out of place in the bright light of the frigate. They'd saved her life by becoming something less than human, reducing themselves to near death in order to slip through cracks in the enemy's perception. It was brilliant and horrifying in equal measure. "Captain," Rebecca said quietly, "what happens to them after recovery?" Brennan's expression grew somber. "They rest, they debrief, and they train for the next operation. Task Force 66 is a small unit, but they've become essential to our strategy against the Vorun. As long as the war continues, we'll need people willing to make themselves invisible. By almost dying. By walking the line between life and death so precisely that they can exist in the space where the Vorun can't perceive." Brennan placed a hand on Rebecca's shoulder. "It's not the kind of warfare anyone wanted, but it's the kind we need." Rebecca nodded, understanding. The galaxy was full of species that had evolved to dominate their environments through specialized senses. The Vorun navigated by thermal and electrical detection, perceiving the universe as a web of heat and current. Humans had no such specialization. They were generalists, adaptable, capable of thinking their way around obstacles rather than simply overpowering them. And when faced with an enemy that could see through walls by detecting heartbeats, humans had responded by learning to stop their hearts. She thought about Commander Voskith's words, his absolute certainty that humans couldn't hide from Vorun sensors. He'd been correct in a way. Task Force 66 hadn't hidden. They'd simply stopped existing as detectable entities, becoming the equivalent of empty space while retaining the ability to move and think and act. "They weren't hiding," Rebecca murmured, remembering the paralyzed guards scattered throughout the spire. "They were just there, like the air itself had decided to grow hands." Brennan raised an eyebrow. "That's one way to describe it." The Nightingale's engines thrummed to life, breaking orbit with practiced efficiency. Rebecca watched through a viewport as the frozen world fell away, the sensor-silent spire now just a tiny dark point against the white landscape. Somewhere down there, Voskith and his guards would be waking up, trying to piece together what had happened. Their sensors would tell them nothing. The recordings would show empty corridors, ambient temperatures, no electrical signatures of intruders. They would search for evidence of stealth technology, of cloaking fields or sensor jammers. They would never understand that the answer was simpler and stranger than that. Humans had looked at the Vorun's greatest strength and found the space where strength became weakness. They'd learned to inhabit that space with cold precision. In the medical bay, Tate sat on an examination table while a doctor monitored her vitals. Her skin had regained most of its normal color, and her breathing had returned to a regular rhythm. She caught Rebecca watching and offered a small smile. "How do you feel?" Rebecca asked. Tate considered the question. "Warm, present, real." She flexed her fingers, watching the movement as if rediscovering what it meant to be fully alive. "It always takes a while to come all the way back. Your body remembers being cold and still, even after the chemicals wear off. Do you regret it? The training, the missions?" "No," the answer came without hesitation. "We're good at this and it saves lives. That matters more than comfort or normalcy." Rebecca wanted to argue that point, to suggest there had to be limits to what people should sacrifice for the war effort. But she'd spent 37 days in the sensor-silent spire, knowing that rescue was impossible. And these 6 strangers had proven her wrong by turning themselves into something the Vorun couldn't comprehend. "Thank you," Rebecca said finally. "I know it's not enough, but thank you." Tate's smile widened slightly. "It's enough, now go get some rest. The captain's right about the debrief. Intelligence is going to want everything you remember about Vorun encryption methods." Rebecca nodded and left the medical bay. A crew member escorted her to guest quarters, a small cabin with an actual bed and climate controls that responded to her preferences. She locked the door, stripped off the clothes she'd worn for weeks, and stood under a shower set to maximum heat. The water sluiced away layers of grime and stress, and she let herself cry for the first time since her capture. When she emerged, wrapped in a standard-issue robe, she found a message waiting on the cabin's display. It was from Earth Command, congratulating her on her rescue and confirming her return schedule. The tone was professional, almost perfunctory, as if extraction from an enemy fortress were a routine matter. Rebecca supposed that for TF-66 it was. She lay down on the bed, savoring the simple luxury of clean sheets and controlled temperature. Sleep came quickly, but her dreams were filled with images of gray-suited figures moving through snow, their hearts beating so slowly that they might as well have been ghosts. In her dreams, they walked through walls, untouched by sensors, unseen by eyes, existing in the spaces between perception and reality. When she woke 6 hours later, the Nightingale was already 3 jumps closer to Earth. Rebecca spent the journey writing detailed reports about Vorun technology, their security protocols, and their absolute reliance on thermal and electrical sensors. She noted every weakness she'd observed, every gap in their defensive philosophy. And she wrote about the rescue team, though she suspected those sections would be heavily redacted before distribution. She described their technique as best she could understand it, the way they'd moved with inhuman precision through a fortress designed to detect human presence. She tried to capture the eerie beauty of their synchronized movements, the way they'd extracted her without firing a shot or taking a life. The brass would want tactical analysis, strategic recommendations, data they could use to plan future operations. But Rebecca felt compelled to document something else. The fact that humanity's answer to an enemy with superior senses was to make themselves imperceptible, to exist in a state of near death, so convincing that advanced sensors registered them as nothing at all. It was the most human response imaginable, she realized. Not to match the Vorun's capabilities, but to find the angle they'd never considered and exploit it ruthlessly. The week passed in a blur of reports and recovery. Rebecca regained the weight she'd lost during captivity, and the medical staff cleared her for normal activity. She spent time with Tate and the rest of Task Force 66 when their recovery protocol allowed visitors. They were surprisingly normal when their body temperatures returned to baseline, telling jokes, playing cards, arguing about sports scores from Earth broadcasts. Only their eyes retained that distant quality, as if part of them remained in hibernation even when warm and vital. Earth appeared as a blue marble against the black, and Rebecca felt her throat tighten with emotion. The Nightingale descended through standard approach vectors, docking at Luna Station for security processing. Officials met her at the airlock, their questions perfunctory now that her reports had been filed and reviewed. They wanted to rush her to a secure facility for expanded debriefing, but Rebecca insisted on one stop first. She found Task Force 66 in their assigned quarters, packing gear for their next rotation. Tate looked up as Rebecca entered, her expression curious. "I wanted to see you before you shipped out," Rebecca said. "To say thank you properly now that my brain isn't still catching up to the fact that I'm free." Tate set down the equipment she'd been organizing. "You already thanked us, Doctor." "I know. But I've been thinking about what you do, what it costs you." Rebecca glanced around at the other team members, Foster, Huang, Thompson, Rodriguez, and a quiet woman named Patricia Vance, who hadn't spoken much during the extraction. "You walk into places designed to detect any sign of life, and you do it by convincing your own bodies that you're dying. That takes a kind of courage I don't think most people understand." "It's just training," Foster said, but her tone suggested she appreciated the recognition. "It's more than that." Rebecca met each of their gazes in turn. "The Vorun thought they had me locked in an unbreakable cage. They were so certain of their sensors, their technology, their ability to detect any human presence. And you proved them wrong by finding the one space they couldn't perceive. That's not just courage. That's poetry," Huang laughed quietly. "Never been called poetic before. Get used to it." Rebecca smiled. "What you did is going to change how we fight this war. Once Command understands that the Vorun's greatest strength is also their greatest vulnerability, they'll develop new strategies. You've shown us the way forward." Tate nodded slowly. "We hope so. But there's a lot of galaxy out there, and the Vorun aren't the only species that relies on specialized senses. Each one requires different approaches. Then I'm glad we have people like you figuring those approaches out." Rebecca extended her hand, and Tate shook it firmly. "Stay safe out there in the cold and quiet. We will, and you stay safe in the warm and loud." Tate's smile carried genuine warmth. "Don't let the brass bury you in classified facilities. The world needs minds like yours working where they can do the most good." Rebecca promised she'd try, though she suspected that promise would be difficult to keep. Earth Command had plans for her, most of which involved secure laboratories and quantum encryption research that would never see public acknowledgement. But at least she'd be free to pursue those plans. She left them to their preparations and reported to the debriefing facility as instructed. The sessions lasted for days, intelligence officers mining her memory for every detail about Vorun capabilities and psychology. She told them everything, holding back nothing, and watched as analysts began constructing new tactical frameworks based on her observations. When they asked about her rescue, she kept her description simple and factual. Task Force 66 had infiltrated the sensor-silent spire using biological hibernation techniques that dropped their thermal and electrical signatures to ambient levels. They'd neutralized guards with paralytic agents and extracted her without casualties on either side. The details were in her written report. What she didn't include in any official document was the feeling she'd had watching Tate and her team move through that fortress. The sense that she'd witnessed something profound. Humanity's ability to adapt to impossible circumstances by becoming something new. Not stronger or faster or more advanced, but fundamentally different in ways the enemy couldn't predict or counter. The Vorun had built their entire civilization around the certainty that living things could be detected by their heat and electrical activity. They'd never imagined encountering a species capable of temporarily shutting down both while remaining conscious and mobile. It broke their understanding of biology itself. And that, Rebecca realized, was the true horror of Task Force 66 from the enemy's perspective. Not that humans could sneak past sensors, but that they could willingly reduce themselves to a state indistinguishable from death for tactical advantage. That they could inhabit that state with clarity and purpose, moving with precision while their hearts barely beat and their bodies registered as cold as the surrounding air. She thought about Commander Voskith's words again, his certainty that humans couldn't hide from Vorun detection. He'd been looking for stealth technology, jamming systems, some external device that could fool the sensors. He'd never considered that humans might alter themselves to become the ghosts his sensors couldn't perceive. 3 months after her return to Earth, Rebecca received a message from an encrypted source. It contained no text, just a single image. 6 figures in gray suits standing in falling snow, their faces turned toward the camera. The resolution was poor, as if taken from a distance, but she recognized the team immediately. They were somewhere on another frozen world, preparing for another impossible insertion. She saved the image to her personal files, a reminder that somewhere in the galaxy, humans were fighting a war by learning to disappear, by slowing their hearts and cooling their blood, and moving through enemy territory as if they were already dead, by becoming the thing the Vorun feared most, life that registered as lifeless, intelligence that manifested as empty space, death that walked with purpose and precision. The war would continue for years, Rebecca knew. The Vorun were numerous and well-equipped, and their sensor technology gave them advantages in most conventional engagements. But they'd learned something now, something that would spread through their ranks as a whisper of dread. Humans didn't fight fair. When confronted with superior senses, they didn't develop better sensors. They learned to become invisible to those senses entirely. And they did it by embracing the one thing most species feared above all else, the threshold between life and death. The cold silence where heartbeats stopped, and warmth faded, and consciousness persisted in the space where perception said nothing should exist. That was the message Task Force 66 had delivered to the Vorun, and it would echo through every engagement that followed. Not a message of strength or superiority, but something far more unsettling. Humans could become whatever the situation required, even if it meant temporarily becoming corpses that walked and killed with glacial precision. Rebecca returned to her work, developing new encryption protocols and security systems for Earth's expanding fleet. But part of her attention always remained focused on the classified reports that occasionally crossed her desk. Brief mentions of successful asset recovery and zero-casualty infiltrations behind enemy lines. She knew what those phrases meant. Task Force 66 and units like them, moving through the cold and quiet, their hearts beating once every 5 minutes, their bodies registering as nothing more than background radiation. Ghosts in gray suits, extracting prisoners and planting surveillance devices, and demonstrating with each mission that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or firepower. It was adaptability taken to its logical extreme, the willingness to become something the enemy's biology couldn't comprehend, to exist in spaces where existence itself seemed impossible. And that, Rebecca thought as she returned to her equations and encryption keys, was the most human thing imaginable. To look at an impossible problem and solve it by redefining what was possible. The Vorun had thought they'd captured a valuable asset when they took her. They'd been confident in their sensor-silent spire, certain that no rescue could reach her through their web of detection. They'd underestimated humanity's capacity for creative solutions and desperate measures. They wouldn't make that mistake again, but by then it wouldn't matter. Task Force 66 had shown the path forward, and others were already following. Across the war zones, human operators were learning to slow their hearts and cool their blood, to move through enemy territory as silent as death itself. The Vorun could detect life with incredible precision, but they'd never learned to detect the absence of life that still carried intention and purpose. That blind spot would cost them everything, one paralyzed guard at a time, one impossible rescue after another, until they finally understood what they were fighting. Not an enemy that hid, but an enemy that could choose to stop existing by every metric their senses recognized, then strike from the blind spots in their perception with surgical precision. Rebecca saved her work and closed the encryption files, her mind already moving to the next problem that needed solving. Outside her window, Earth turned peacefully through its orbit, defended by fleets and armies and silent operators who walked the line between life and death. The war was far from over, but humanity had found its edge. And that edge was colder and sharper than anything the Vorun had imagined possible.